Did you know that Britain was central to the start of Europe's Bronze Age, and that even West Asia depended on British tin for centuries in order to produce its bronze? Around 2400 BC, a race of Indo-European people from the Lower Rhine took over Britain. Archaeologists call them the Beaker Folk because their high-status burials were accompanied by bell-shaped drinking vessels. They introduced the first metal items to the British Isles, but these were just mainly made of gold or arsenical copper at first, and they weren't very strong. Some of Britain's most stunning early metalwork is made of gold, like the Mould Cape, the Bush Barrow Lozenge, and Ireland's gold lunulae, all showcasing dazzling craftsmanship. But as prospectors panned for gold in the rivers of Cornwall and Devon, they stumbled upon something almost as valuable and far more useful: tin. This Bronze Age necklace from Dartmoor in Devon has beads made from imported Danish amber, shale, and a local tin bead in the middle. This tin triggered the shift to the Bronze Age. Britain wasn't just a remote corner of prehistoric Europe, it was the powerhouse of the Bronze Age, thanks to tin.
Cornwall is rich in tin, and that's why, at the end of the Neolithic, beginning of the Bronze Age, the Bell Beaker folk, an indo-European people coming in from Holland, intended to dig up all the tin they could, which was used in the production of the alloy bronze. And so these pits represent the beginning of metallurgy in Britain, the beginning of industry, the beginning of all use of metal tools in Northern Europe, with these humble pits.
By 3000 BC, tin bronze was used in Anatolia, even though tin was rare there. But bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, was still unknown in most of Europe. By 2200 BC, 50% of metal artifacts in West Asia were made from tin bronze, with the tin sourced from mines in Central Asia. The rest were just made from arsenical copper. But at the same time, the Beaker folk of southwest Britain discovered the rich tin deposits in the rivers of Cornwall and Devon. Around 2200 BC, they switched over to only using tin bronze, ending the Copper Age and kick-starting the European Bronze Age, with the rest of Europe gradually following suit after tin was exported from Britain. A structure found near the village of Senan in Cornwall, dating to around 2400 to 2100 BC, contained beaker pottery, and analysis of stone tools highlighted patches of high tin concentration and microware consistent with their use in tin ore crushing. This is the earliest evidence in all of Europe for tin ore mining. Tin ingots have also been found in Bronze Age shipwrecks in Devon, showing there was early export of the tin abroad. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote in 420 BC that the Cassiterides, meaning tin place, were distant islands whence the tin in Greece was sourced. He either referred to the Scilly Isles off the coast of Cornwall or to the British Isles as a whole. Historians as far back as the 50s have recognised the crucial role the British Beaker folk played in opening up routes of international trade and promoting metallurgy. Vere Gordon Child wrote in 1957, "The Beaker folk was a principal agency in opening up communications, establishing commercial relations, and diffusing the practice of metallurgy. Beaker folk can be recognised not only by their economic activities, but also by their distinctive armaments, ornaments, and above all, pottery, associated together everywhere in their graves. Indeed, the inevitable drinking cup, which gives a name to its users, may be more than a readily recognised diagnostic symptom. It symbolises beer as one source of their influence. The people buried with Bell Beakers are round-headed. In this instance, therefore, it looks as if culture and race coincided, and one might legitimately speak of a Beaker race. Now, this Beaker race is the same race that lives in northwest Europe today. And recent research has shown that most of the tin in the Bronze Age Mediterranean came from Cornwall and Devon. The earliest metal items in Britain besides gold ornaments were bronze daggers and axes, and like the gold, they often survived because they were included in human burials within the barrows of great men, possibly the kings of Bronze Age Britain. For such men, these state-of-the-art creations were status symbols as well as deadly weapons. Bronze weapons represent an evolution in human capability. The smelting of copper and tin, the control of heat, the casting of tools and weapons. These weren't just technological feats, they were sacred acts, alchemy in the truest sense of the word. But imagine, just for a moment, if all of it were lost. The knowledge of fire, metal, medicine, and other essential skills. What would it take to start again? That's exactly what the book by Hungry Minds dares to answer. The book from Hungry Minds is a 400-page manual for rebuilding civilization, a compendium of ancestral wisdom, scientific clarity, and practical skill. It covers everything from sustainable farming to metallurgy, medicine to mechanics, even the architecture of social order. Not theory, application, the kind of knowledge that survives ages. And it speaks in more than words. Buried within the illustrations are riddles, ciphers, and a hidden quest. If you're the kind of person who treasures traditional craftsmanship, fears what's coming, and wants to be prepared, this book isn't just for your shelf, it's for your future. When the lights go out, this is the kind of book you'll wish you had. Around 4,000 years ago, swords hadn't yet arrived in Britain. Instead, knives had got larger and larger until they became what some people call dirks. The first proper swords in Britain date to the Pennard period, over 700 years later. But what did the earlier bronze weapons look like before swords? Perhaps unsurprisingly, considering the vital tin of the region, a fair few of Britain's early bronze weapons were found in the West Country of Cornwall and Devon. In 1872, a dentist from Plymouth excavated one of the many Bronze Age barrows on Dartmoor, located at Two Burrows. Some of these barrows are made more of stones than earth, and so they're sometimes called cairns, but either way, they usually contain a stone kist in the middle in which the cremated remains of the deceased were placed. This diagram is a cross-section of a similar barrow on Dartmoor near Leet, which was excavated in the same period. Inside the barrow's kist, the dentist, Spence Bate, found among the burnt bones an extremely rare dagger pommel made from amber and a grooved blade which used to be attached to a long rotted away wooden handle. It was dubbed the Hameldown dagger. The original was destroyed by bombing in World War II, but this stunning replica was made by Neil Burridge, who is probably the greatest Bronze Age swordsmith in the world today. I went to visit him at his studio in Cornwall, the heartland of ancient bronze, to learn more. People not familiar maybe with like the differences. What's the main difference? Like, how would someone identify like a British type of Bronze Age sort of dagger or sword from a contemporary Mediterranean one, like from Mycenae or something?
That's a big question. There's no easy answer. Every step in sort of metalworking in this early time, they all seem to follow the same route. It might be in a different place, but they all gradually work towards, basically it starts off as knives become daggers, daggers become dirks, dirks become rapiers, and rapiers finally become sword. And then the last major important step is the addition of the handle on the end of the casting.
Yes.
So the technology develops, but obviously in the Mediterranean it starts so much earlier. So it starts with copper metallurgy, and that gradually spreads across Europe, and it really is gradually. There's trade, there's people coming to Cornwall and trading. There's no doubt that Cornish tin was travelling down into the Mediterranean. More recent research is kind of making that look the most sort of definitely possible scenario.
How many bronze blades have you made in your life, do you know?
I think it must be getting towards 300.
Wow.
Yeah, that's quite profound, isn't it?
You may have made more bronze blades than anyone alive.
Since the Bronze Age, yeah. And I cast them one at a time. So I'm not like an industrial foundry where I melt 20 kilos and I have 12 moulds running along the workshop floor, and they basically suspend the crucible and pour them one at a time from the same crucible. Yeah, all mine are cast one at a time. They're single casts. So I might do a run if I'm running moulds and reheat every time and reload the mould and reload the
clay moulds.
I use stone moulds.
Okay.
So I've been doing that for ages.
Because I've seen in some clay moulds in museums, they did do that sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Like those would only have 1 or 2 uses or something?
1 or 2 uses, and they take quite a lot of time. You've got to make the impressions, 2 impressions, a bit like simplify it down. If you took a sausage and you get 2 slices of buttered bread and you put it round the sausage, take a print of the sausage, peel the bread apart, leave the print in, but take the sausage out. That's what the mould's like. So you take an impression of the blade from both sides, and then you've got to carefully dry it so it doesn't distort. And then once it's dried, you can put the 2 halves back together again like an Easter egg, and then you could put a clay wrap around the outside, a bit like putting the foil on an Easter egg. And then you can fire it, so you'd offer your mould up hot and pour the bronze in when it had fired out.
And what's the copper tin mix about?
It depends where you go. If you spin or throw a dart in the Mediterranean, it could be anything up to 12% with the Aegean swords.
12% tin?
Yeah. And if you go Britain, it's usually somewhere around 10% with 2% lead and the rest copper. It varies.
Surprisingly, we use less tin at the source of the tin.
No, it varies. It's not that's the middle. So some swords you'll get lower down, and some swords you'll get higher up.
Somewhere around 10% is going to be.
It's a ballpark figure. If you threw a dart, that would be somewhere near the middle.
And when you do it, you do it like by eye, or do you just?
No, I have my recipes, and I basically use copper wire, tin, and lead. And I vary it depending on what the object is. Yeah, Smith's got to have a few secrets. Yeah.
Well, I'm very excited to see what's in this wrapped case here. The Huntshaw dagger.
Yeah, I suppose you've never actually seen it, have you?
No, not seen it yet. Very excited. The Huntshaw dagger was discovered in 1875 in one of 6 or 7 barrows on Darracott Moor in North Devon. It was in Barrow 2, which had been excavated once before and stands next to a near identical barrow which did not contain a dagger. The dagger is classed as the Camerton Snowshill type, which is a type formerly thought to date to after 1700 BC, until in 2013, when the bones from this barrow were carbon dated to between 2000 and 1800 BC, making it one of the oldest such weapons in the country with a confirmed date.
So in 1875, despite there being unsuccessful excavations of these barrows in the 1860s, local archaeologist George Doe came here and led a second excavation of the barrows and successfully retrieved the Huntshaw dagger, actually a kind of dirk, the largest kind of bladed weapon in Britain at the time that it was made, from the eastern barrow. Even at the time, the 3 rivets were visible and some wood adhered to them, as well as 2 small sheaths of wood either side of the blade, which were the remains of the sheath.
From the old excavation notes by local archaeologist George Doe, we can reconstruct the funerary ritual as follows. The kist would have been constructed prior to cremation. Some of the rocks were burned, so it seems the dead man, quite probably a local king, was placed into the kist and burned there. Contemporary inhumation burials from related Bell Beaker cultures place the deceased in a crouched fetal position, so perhaps those who were to be cremated were also positioned in this way before being burnt. After burning, a large capstone was placed over the crudely constructed kist, and the bones were covered with a combination of beech and oak leaves, which were miraculously well preserved 3,800 years later when they were excavated. The Huntshaw dagger was placed inside the kist, within its wooden sheath.
When these barrows were constructed, there was a burning of the land, leaving a layer of charcoal, and then on top of that, they covered it in white clay.
Finally, the kist was covered with a barrow, not made from the surrounding mud, but from an unusual pale clay, which was brought there especially and had been worked so that it was free of stones and grit. The barrow was 8 metres wide and nearly a metre high in 1874, but probably stood at least 1.5 metres tall when it was made. There was evidence of charcoal streaking within the white clay, as if it had been fired. We can imagine the newly built barrows would have looked rather impressive, gleaming white in the sunshine. Wow. So the Jess Pask made this wonderful sheath, which has a calf skin interior, and here's the blade. Wow.
So all that me hammering around, it's kind of lost now. You can barely see it, but it was like a day just hammering one step in the blade, just trying to understand how it got thicker there and thinner there.
That's beautiful. Do you know what the mix of tin and copper was?
That would be 12%, so that was pretty hard going.
Wow. Fits very nicely in the hand,
Yeah, no, I've done the pommel in the sort of style of the Hambledon Down one.
Yeah. Very similar kind.
Which is the amber and gold pins.
Mm-hmm.
So
you think this was a native style rather than a Central European style? Because the actual information sheet at Huntshaw, which is an Iron Age hill fort there, near to the barrow where this was, the Bronze Age barrow where this was found, and the people behind it wrote that it was based on a Central European type, but I'm not sure that's true.
No, I personally wouldn't agree with that, just by the number of that type found here. And the few Central European type ones are completely recognisable as not being British. Mm-hmm. These are super status. I always say that blades go through 4 stages of development. First they're a functional tool, and people make it. Then people start making tools that are far more beautiful than they need to be. Swords become, or metalwork becomes, status, and it shows who you are and your level of status. And then the final sort of phase of blades and stuff is this kind of spiritual realm, that swords have a birth, a life and a death, and how they die is not really understood. So to take that with you in your grave, it makes throw in Rolls Royces and swimming pools look really boring.
Mm-hmm.
You just see, oh, it's a cliche. But to be buried with your fabulous bronze dagger, that is the pinnacle of metalworking, and that's super, super prestigious.
That was pretty much the largest metal item you could have at that point in history.
Only for the chosen few. So
not just not a normal local farmer in that grave then.
No, definitely kingly grave. So they must have some kind of afterlife.
Yeah.
They must have, they must have felt the dagger would go in use in the next life.
Andy Jones, principal archaeologist with the Cornwall Archaeological Unit of the Cornwall Council, wrote that it has been suggested that they were masculine items used as stabbing weapons during episodes of close interpersonal violence, or delivering the coup de grace to a wounded animal at the end of a hunt, or for cutting up meats at feasts. They would also have been distinctive objects that had potent display properties. As such, a straightforward reading would be that they were deployed in graves to mark the status of a warrior elite. It is certainly the case that several of the daggers in the southwest, such as those from Hameldown and Huntshaw, were finely made items which may have been high-status objects made for display. However, Neil Burridge strongly insists that these daggers were made to be used not just for stabbing but for slashing too. They were extremely strong and well made.
Some people used to think because of the way the rivets are attached that it would not be suitable for slashing and that it was only a stabbing weapon, but that wouldn't explain why the edges have been hardened and sharpened. So it does seem to me that it was used for slashing as well as for stabbing, and there's also some evidence that they were used for other things besides war, like they might have been used as tools as well. I mean, even if it was a very high status expensive item, the temptation to actually use it to skin a lamb or something, if you needed to, would be quite high, considering how much better this would be as a tool than a stone. I mean, this is still, the Stone Age is over when this has been made, but stone tools are still widely used, and they are very much inferior to metal. So I think, people would be quite likely to make use of this excellent tool.
To understand the meaning of daggers and other weapons in burials, we should also consider depictions of such weapons in contemporary artwork. The Beaker Folk carved pictures of their bronze daggers and other weapons onto Stonehenge, a way to mark their culture on a monument of the preceding people they had conquered. These similar daggers and axes were carved around the same time on a sandstone which was placed inside a barrow in Badbury in Dorset. So it wasn't just the weapon itself that could be interred with the dead, but the image of a weapon also. This carving from a stone in Melegno in Lombardy in northern Italy is also contemporary to the early Bronze Age and shows several weapons beneath a solar symbol, indicating a religious significance. And in Cantabria, northern Spain, this spearhead was carved in the later Bronze Age, showing this cultural tradition endured for many centuries. So clearly these weapons were potent symbols, and therefore they may have been employed in burials not merely because they were owned by the deceased, but because they were essential for the funerary rites at the barrow. They imbued the activities with a certain spiritual power because they were symbols of power relating not only to war and prestige, but probably to the gods themselves. Many of the barrows in southwest Britain from this time didn't have daggers in them. In fact, they are rare. So their presence indicates a very particular meaning that is exclusive to these barrows and the men buried in them. The daggers which accompany the dead are usually kept separate from the corpse, showing that they had a symbolic power quite distinct from that of the dead men they were buried with. The daggers were also interred at a number of sites, such as the cairn at Caerlogus in Cornwall, where no human remains were deposited. In these cases, the dagger itself is evidently the focus of the ritual activity and not merely a prop in a wider funerary ritual. Formerly, the Huntshaw dagger was considered to be a crude copy of continental weapons by provincial British culture. But now, thanks to scientific analysis of Bronze Age tin ingots around Europe and the Mediterranean, and also reliable carbon dating of remains from the Huntshaw barrow itself, we can say that this weapon represents a state-of-the-art, sacred religious artifact. And it was made in a time and place where innovative new metallurgic techniques were about to transform European culture and history for centuries.